as I have mentioned before, one of my favorite pastime activities is to go in the past and find predictions of the future to see how well they manage to withstand the test of time. And today I found something very interesting from 4chan, which was posted in 2014, explaining why people dislike social justice activists. Now, for those of you who are unaware what 4chan is, it's a message board on the internet which allows for its users to remain anonymous. And because of that, a lot of people openly speak their mind, other people just want to post edgy stuff in order to troll. But occasionally you do have some very interesting pieces of information. And what I find absolutely fascinating about this website is that in the past, when the Bush era existed, the website was very left-leaning. It had a lot of people that were advocating for atheism. It had a lot of people calling right-wingers out. And over time, the website shifted to the right, to the point where now, well, you have the website that you know. But what I want to point out is that because the website used to be left-leaning, a lot of people, especially from Tumblr, with the inception of the social justice movement, were wondering why is it that the people on 4chan are so resistant to these campaigns of social justice. And they didn't understand why a website that they used to consider an ally is now moving away from the ideology that the left-leaning academics are pushing. So you have this post which is saying, what is wrong with social justice warriors? What do you have against us? We are fighting to end hate, to unite as one and to love each other. We are fighting to be treated right without discrimination and for everyone to have equal opportunities. So why? Why do you hate us? Why do you want us out? I don't understand. Now, this has been written in 2014 when the internet was quite new to this way of thinking. Social justice activists at the time, they still had a lot of goodwill from society. Most people viewed them as benevolent, and they viewed them as people that are genuinely trying to improve the world. However, the website of 4chan, we're calling them out, and we're going to see exactly why that is, as one poster accurately explains. And again, take into account, this is from 2014. This is when social justice were concerned mostly with feminism, and most articles were attacking straight white males. They didn't even use the word cis at the time, because they were laser focused on achieving equality between men and women. And you also had like other flavors that existed in the movement, but they weren't front and center. So the reason given by a poster on 4chan why social justice activists aren't embraced by everyone is that they have no quantifiable metric for injustice. You have no victory condition. For a very simplified example, when blacks hold X% of all engineering jobs and only Y% of all prisoners, racism is ended. That would be fine in itself. But you believe in fighting injustice with injustice. Gays have historically been denied gay marriage, so let's get random CEOs fired for opinions they held 6 years ago. You don't seek converts, you seek to punish and bully. Straight white males who disagree with you must be purged and publicly humiliated. Even the jihadis will spare you if you convert. No apology or future correction will satisfy a social justice activist. Take into account that this is written in 2014, where people weren't being fired for things they said years ago. People weren't being fired in order to make room for more progressive individuals, like CEOs getting fired in order to have more LGBT people represented. Which, by the way, as I understand it, is now being passed into legislation in California. So all of these things were predicted in 2014. I could forgive that too if you weren't all hypocrites and liars. Your treatment of women and minorities, dissenters, is appalling. If they don't want you acting on their behalf, that's their choice. It's not internalized patriarchy or whatever. So they created this social construct that you would have activists like Bell Hooks or Anita Sarkeesian speak on behalf of all women. And they would never poll or survey or even be interested in what the groups they were talking for thought about their activism. But what they did is that whenever you had a woman speaking against Anita Sarkeesian or against Bell Hooks, then she clearly was suffering from internalized misogyny. In other words, there was no way of debunking the things that they said. And when you look at the first complaint that they have no victory condition, that you cannot quantify oppression and you cannot quantify racism, the main problem I see with this is not necessarily that you don't have a winning strategy. The main problem is that if you have certain draconic legislation which are being passed for the greater good, like let's say in Scotland they have a legislation which is now going to criminalize hate speech done inside a person's own home. So for example, if you're sitting at the dinner table and you make a racist joke, that can now be classified as hate speech under Scottish law. So it's a very draconic and invasive piece of legislation, which is arguably to better society. But how do you know that it's actually serving that particular effect if you cannot quantify injustice? You cannot have this legislation and then 1 year down the line you look at the percentage of injustice to see if it has dropped or raised or stayed the same. Because if it stayed the same or raised, then it means the legislation was unnecessary. So why would you want to pass draconic legislation to begin with? A better example would be that of trigger warnings. Now, there was this massive push culturally to get people to have trigger warnings whenever they would write an article or at the beginning of a movie. And it even went to the ridiculous extent where some university professors would have trigger warnings at their lectures. The idea was that if a student has been a victim of rape, that they would be warned that that material could be triggering for them so that they could leave. But obviously this would cause great harm, because if you are teaching at a law school, you need to teach the future lawyers and the future judges how to deal with rape cases. Because that's your job. Like, you as a lawyer might be in a position where you have to either defend a person that has raped, which is a horrible thing, but it's part of your job that you need to do to make sure that the person gets the exact amount of time that he has been guilty of. If he has done something which warrants 4 years in prison, he should get 4 years and not 7. It's your job as a lawyer to make sure that justice is being passed, regardless of how morally apprehensible that person may have been and regardless of how it makes you feel. It's a tough career that you choose when you go to law school. But because certain professors were like, okay, well, we can't really teach these people about it, how are going to be the future judges who have not been even trained in this particular thing going to rule out cases? So as you can see, the idea of trigger warnings started from what can be said as a nice gesture, but ended up being quite destructive in certain areas. And research even went to show afterwards that trigger warnings were actually more harmful, because a person that could have been triggered was less likely to be triggered than if you warned them beforehand. In other words, it's like watching a television program and it just says this content is going to show graphic and violent material. You're more focused now and you're more aware, so you're like watching every scene to see what constitutes that graphical material than if you weren't told. And that's what the researchers found out. Like, they found out that if you take two groups of people, one of them just read the material, the other ones get trigger warnings. When asked about it, like, how harmful did you find the material to be, the people that were trigger warned found it more harmful than those that weren't. So you need this metric. You need to analyze to see if the solutions that you have for the problem are actually effective or not. But social justice activists aren't interested in seeing if their solutions are effective or not. What they are interested in is for the standing ovation. You see, trigger warning sounds like a great thing. So if you're a person that goes at a university and you put trigger warnings into your paper, all of a sudden everyone thinks that you're a very progressive and moral and decent human being and you need to be applauded and everyone congratulates you. In my opinion, it's very similar with putting pronouns in the bio. It's similar to how the Christians used to have like massive golden crucifixes around their neck. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that you need to have golden crucifixes on your neck, but it was a display of piety. They wanted other people around them to congratulate them for how Christians they are. You see, they are such believers that they went and spent a lot of their money in order to display to others their faith and put their faith around their neck. The Bible doesn't tell you that you need to buy golden crucifixes, okay? It's the same with the pronouns in the bio. Allegedly, it's done to help trans people. But I've yet to see any study or research that shows this is the case. What I do think this is for people to show how pious they are to their peers, to display that they're part of the good citizens and to get recognition for it. It's what social justice is really about. You know, like, if I were to be asked by my son to describe what social justice warriors are, the way I would describe it is like, well, you know how all of us think that Nazis are bad? And my son would be like, yeah. Well, social justice warriors want to say that Nazis are bad and receive a standing ovation for it. It's not about changing the world. It's just about getting standing ovations, applause, and acclaim for your correct thinking and your correct speech, never your actions. But anyway, I digress. I went into a tangent. I want to go back to what this anonymous person on 4chan was saying. He also pointed out how when people that are the alleged victims and the minorities that the social justice activists are trying to defend, when they speak out, they are being persecuted by the activists. Think about Kanye West. Think about the Hodge twins. Think about Diamond and Silk. Think about Candace Owens. Think about like all these people that whatever they don't toe the line, like Amy Corey Barrett, for example, they get attacked by the activists that claim to speak on them. Because at the end of the day, social justice is not about improving the life of people, but it's using the life of people as vectors so that the social justice activist gets a claim and standing ovation. You insist on vigilante justice against random acts of the week for your 2 minutes hate. Why is it that the NFL business to punish domestic violence? And if it is their business, why isn't Hope Solo receiving the same attention from your side? In other words, he is talking about from 2014 how the NFL, like businesses that are operating to make a profit, are getting involved in politics. And he is asking, like, what on earth is the NFL's business to talk about domestic violence? That seems like a matter of the church and a matter of the officers and the law to tackle, not the NFL. Then you claim to be arguing for equality. But you've taken the idea of racism, which is that hatred based on skin color is bad, and replace it with a new concept where only one race can be guilty of racism. You excuse racial prejudice and hatred based on what I've already explained are arbitrary, unmeasured stats of being, and your solution for that unequal treatment of whites and blacks is to hold whites to a higher standard. Your side lobbied the FBI to redefine rape so more women victims could be counted, but also so that, quote-unquote, made to penetrate does not count, leaving male victims in the cold. What the anonymous poster is identifying here is something that historians noticed in Eastern Europe as well, regarding both Marxists and Nazis, if you can believe it. The Marxists, the economic types, they would advocate for more rights for the workers, but never responsibility for the workers. The workers were always held in a lower standard, and the factory owners were always held in a higher standard. So, for example, if, let's say, a union boss or a prominent worker would commit a crime, it was usually swept under the rug by the Marxists. They would pretend it doesn't exist. But the moment the factory owner would do something or they would say something which could be perceived negatively, then they would laser focus in on that. And the Nazis did the same with the Jewish people. Like, whenever a German would do something that was bad, it's like, oh, well, you know, like they would pretend it didn't happen. But when they would have a Jewish person do something that was bad, that was laser focused, that was hyper focused. And usually it was tried to be made that it's a stereotype, it's a broad generalization. And this is what social justice did in 2014, and they're still doing today. And the best example is, okay, you care about eliminating rape from society. Why do you eliminate the idea of men can be raped? Right? So a woman, by their definition, can never rape a man. A black person, by their definition, can never be racist towards a white person. Like, why do you need that? Why can't you hold everyone to the same standards? Why is it that all of a sudden you're like, no. Because this is what Herbert Marcuse in his book calls repressive tolerance. Repressive tolerance means that if you hold everyone to the same standard, minorities suffer. Because if you take a society like the United States and you have the same rules for everyone, then the people who find themselves at the top due to previous injustices, they have more power to defend themselves than the people who have find themselves at the bottom due to previous injustices. As such, we need to have repressive tolerance. So when you have the vulnerable people doing criminal acts or behaving in unacceptable ways, we need to be tolerant towards them. But when the people that are on the top are behaving unacceptable, we should not tolerate that at all. So we need to have this selective level of tolerance for the marginalized, but never for the people at the top. And I even saw an interview with a Jewish lady from the United Kingdom who worked at The Guardian. If any of you have that interview, please put it in the comments and I'll pin it, because it's a very interesting one. She used to be a left-leaning person, and she still is. But obviously, being Jewish, she cared a lot about Israel. And she didn't like the fact that at her publication, the other left-leaning people who weren't Jewish, they would side with Palestine no matter what. And what made her leave the publication was when there was an attack from Palestine against Israel, and a lot of civilians got hurt. And no one at her publication wanted to cover it. No one focused on that. And the reason being was that they were advocating for this repressive tolerance thing. It's like when the marginalized people are doing it, it's fine. We need to tolerate that because they aren't wealthy enough to have the same upbringing and moral compass like the people who are privileged. While the people who are privileged, when they do something bad, they should be always held under scrutiny. The poster says, I've been lucky enough to grow up in America, so this shit is new to me. But I'm descended from Puritans and I know my history. I know how they treated dissent. I also know how communists treated dissent. I grew up next door to a grizzled old Russian who barely avoided the gulag by smuggling himself out of the country. I know what you petty tyrants have turned into every time you gained enough power. Worst of all, you turned the very principles of freedom against us. We tolerate you because we believe in free speech and civil discourse, not bullying and violence. But that means we have to watch you advocate against that very freedom. We don't believe in ruining a stranger's professional life over an opinion, but that means that we can't punish your actions. So it's exactly what it happened to the new editor at the Vogue magazine, which is a left-leaning person. Everything this guy predicted in 2014 is happening today, not against the right-wingers, but also against left-leaning people as well, like the editor from Teen Vogue. I'll make another video about that. Very interesting. And the guy keeps going. He says, we believe that the rightness of our actions should speak for itself. You believe in bullying even if you claim to love the oppressed. Funny how the evil and all-powerful patriarchy has seen fit to act accordingly to social justice whims for all of recent memory, punishing those they hate and protecting those they love. Funny how evil oppressors' males have to speak anonymously, while the social justice fighting the power can use their real names and get mainstream media covering for fun and profit. How when a million straight white male nerds get bullied, no one cares. But the minute one person hangs himself, suddenly bullying matters. And the solution, of course, is more bullying, but to the right people. That the arrogant core of it, you don't see, you do the same evil, but the same pattern as so many before you, because mob justice, punishing dissent, and repression of others is just fine and dandy so long as the right people are doing it to the wrong people. Eat shit and die, all I have ever asked to is to be left alone. Well, there is no more being left alone. Grilling apparently is being banned in the UK. You can't just grill, you have to get active, you have to get politically involved. And this was written in 2014. Now, I leave you all to decide whether or not this managed to be an accurate prediction. Now, take into account, in 2014, all of this shit was mostly on the internet. Okay, it wasn't mainstream. Most people didn't even know what social justice means. No one even knew about identity politics to the extent that people know today. Most businesses were neutral and they were just trying to make a profit. They weren't advocating for strong political statements like you see today Coca-Cola being concerned about a voting law from Georgia. So that's why it's very interesting to have a read. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the comment section. Take care.